Hey everybody. So, one of the oldest gig markets out there is FieldNation, and it exists for IT and AV work. Long before we had Uber, DoorDash, and all their clones, we IT people were out there doing contract work, making a living taking care of other companies' clients. I've been taking jobs from FieldNation and other similar platforms such as Work Market since 2008, and I've learned a lot. I've learned how to be successful on FieldNation and maintain a steady stream of work to keep those money juices flowing. I'm going to go over my top 15 tips here so you can successfully navigate the platform and augment your career. We all have different reasons for why you're here looking for work from a place like FieldNation. Perhaps you're recently laid off between jobs and need something to do to make money. Maybe you're starting an IT business and need to get some jobs going. Regardless, you are now self-employed and have to behave and price yourself like a business. You're responsible for your own tools, materials, and transportation. You may even be responsible for sourcing your own additional labor for some jobs. I've had to find many helpers for jobs over the years that I've done on platforms. You're also responsible for your own scheduling, so you have to account for when you're available, how long it takes to get to a job, estimate how long it will take to do that job, and how long to get back home or at least to your next job. Going deeper, that means you have to decide how many jobs you can take that day. In my experience, 2 to 3 is a good target to aim for if you can't get booked for at least 6 hours that day. These companies are often middlemen who need to be able to mark up your rates to be able to profit. So when you are on FieldNation, the rates you're actually going to establish are B2B, or business to business. I don't recall a single time when someone who is the end user reached out to FieldNation to get a tech to their door. The closest that I've seen to that is the 1 or 2 jobs where a company's IT department used FieldNation as an extension of their labor force, but the vast majority of the work you'll see are coming from other IT businesses. How to calculate rates is an entire discussion, if not a book, and deserves at least one video dedicated to the topic. However, once you establish what your rates are to direct client, you'll probably find that the optimal pricing for B2B will be somewhere between 70 to 80% of what you would charge your own clients. With that said, depending on where you are professionally, especially if you're new, you'll probably wind up taking some jobs for less than you'd like just to gain experience and get reviews on the marketplace. I don't suggest this as a long-term practice, but especially getting started, you need to do what you can to get the ball rolling on some work. You're most definitely responsible for your own transportation. Your costs come from car payments, insurance, fuel, and most definitely your time driving. Companies that post work on FieldNation will almost never mention that you can bid for these, but you almost always can. For whatever reason, even though most places will reimburse based on mileage, when you're a contractor, you need to be charging your clients differently. I found that any strategy to simplify this makes it best for you and your clients. I prefer to bill based on time, not mileage. The reason for this is I can name a dozen different routes that take an hour to drive that all have drastically different mileages. I don't know about you, but I want to get paid the same for every hour I drive, regardless of distance. And if you price accordingly, you'll find your clients like that simplification as well. So here's what I do. I have 4 zones set up, starting at 0 and up to 3, with each number indicating how many hours it takes to drive there. We'll talk about round-trip billing here in a moment. I consider zone 0 to be the in-town rate. So if it takes me no more than 25 minutes to get there, then they don't get a trip fee. If it takes 30 minutes or more, up to an hour, then that goes to zone 1. If it takes 1.5 hours or more, up to 2, then it goes to zone 2. Same logic applies for zone 3. Oddly enough, I don't see very much in zones 0 or 3, so I make sure zones 1 and 2 are priced appropriately. My zone pricing is a function of my hourly rate and fuel pricing. When I started, I set a baseline rate based on then current fuel prices and 75% of my hourly rate. As fuel prices fluctuate, I recalculate this whenever there is a 25% or more change in prices. I try to limit my price changes to once a month, but trying times in 2022 has made it necessary to recalculate this every week sometimes. Why do we not do round trip pricing? Firstly, most clients are going to balk if they realize you're trying to get paid both ways. So if you really want to be compensated for this, you have to bake those value in other areas of your trip fees. I don't think that's necessary though, and here's why. Remember when I said 2 to 3 jobs a day should be your target? So every single job should be quoted based on starting from your home location. It doesn't matter if all 3 of the jobs are in the same city. If they're all an hour away, you should be getting that trip fee for each one, even if it's all the same client, and especially if they're all different clients. So for example, if I have 3 jobs an hour away, especially in the same city, and my trip fee for that is $75 for each one, then that's $225 just for driving around that day, not counting that each job should be priced at a minimum of an hour. We'll just say $95 an hour, which would place you at $510 for the day before any platform fees, which are usually around 13%. So I'm not saying that's necessarily good, or I don't know what you're targeting for money. Seasoned professionals with their own direct clientele can definitely get more than that per day. I'm just saying that when you start doing the math and manage your work orders effectively, you don't have to worry about nickel and diming your clients. While 99% of the time your clients on FieldNation will want to remain on FieldNation with you, occasionally you'll get some that wants to send a larger project to you directly. You might also think about how nice it would be to cut FieldNation out of the loop so you don't have to pay that 13% in platform fees. After having done this and looked at direct relationship with some clients, I can absolutely say it is rarely worth it. Companies that may pay well and timely on FieldNation have their own schedules for paying contractors, and sometimes they want to play the net 30 game. They may even flat rate jobs using purchase orders, and unless you know what those are for, then you'll be slapped in the face when you need to charge more for labor and find out legally you can't. FieldNation offers in itself a conflict resolution system that you can tap into when you need it. They also bake in liability insurance with their fees in case you don't have their own. For so many reasons, you should not take work off platform unless you can risk something going wrong. When I did it, it worked out, but I also learned the hard way about reading purchase orders, which is a lot like a contract, and net 30. That was a very rough month because I had hired someone to help on the cabling job that we had done. Remember when I said that every job from every company has its own set of rules? Just because you see a TV mounting job that sounds like the last one you did that you really liked, you need to read to make sure it's the same company with the same rules and same expectations as the last. Jobs are priced differently with different expectations from techs. You might have additional work, have to provide materials, tools, bring a helper, and a whole host of other things that can cost you more money, or not getting paid at all for not being properly prepared. You can literally get shorted because you don't complete a job to satisfaction, or if you mess up enough, you can do the job, and they'll find an excuse not to pay you at all. You can dispute this with FieldNation, but remember, the contract you agreed to is important and binds you to holding your end of the bargain. FieldNation doesn't have to require that you be paid. For this reason, it is also important to take photos and collect all required signatures every single time you are on site. The more documentation you have when things go wrong will be your lifeline. Every job needs to be checked in and checked out via FieldNation's mobile app. However, you must also pay attention to additional check-in and check-out steps. Oftentimes, you must also call 1 or 2 different help desks to get checked in and checked out completely. Not completing these steps can definitely affect your ability to get paid accurately. For many reasons, companies that contract field techs on FieldNation can be snakes. Sometimes it's intentional, and other times it's not. Let me explain. While there is a minority of companies that will try to take advantage of their techs and glean free work from them, the majority of the time this happens is because of miscommunication and lack of documentation. For example, I was on a job that was only supposed to be about 4 hours and wound up being there overnight for 13, and I was paid for every minute that I was there. The conversation I had with dispatch was that they don't mind paying their techs in full, but they need the documentation to justify it. They need to know why they're paying over what was expected, especially in the case of these large discrepancies. That said, a few very small things will go a long way. Document, document, document. Everything you document, whether it's notes, photos, signatures, call logs, will help justify the time you spend on site. don't delay getting paperwork in, and don't close out the work order until they've approved any spend limit increases. I found that if I get all the paperwork uploaded before I even leave site and get the spend limit increase put in at that time, it's less time I have to spend later doing paperwork. The longer it takes to get your paperwork done, the longer it takes to get paid. I've seriously been approved for payment before leaving the parking lot a few times. Remember what I said earlier about reading and understanding the scope of work? That's a knife that cuts both ways. You need to know what is not expected of you, because sometimes companies will ask you to do additional work, and you will have a leg to stand on, so you can say, "Not without additional payment." And if they refuse to pay more, then you can get out of doing that additional step. Many times when this happens, it's because the help desk person you're working with is just a call center agent and doesn't actually understand the nuances of field work. So if you tell them why you need more pay because it's not in the paperwork, they will then talk it over with their supervisor, who usually approves whatever increase you're asking. A closed mouth does not get fed. I know I've touched on this a few times already, but it's incredibly important to know, so I'll keep reiterating it. Flat out, not reading the requirements of each job will burn you almost every time. Some clients are subcontractors for larger IT companies, and those larger companies will send work to various contractors who may all be on FieldNation. I've taken NCR work orders from 3 different companies, as well as from NCR directly, all on FieldNation. I mention NCR by name because they're one of my favorites to do work with, probably because I really like point of sale work. With those NCR work orders, every single time I had different points of contact and different rules of engagement depending on which of their contractors I was working through. There was always a contact at the contractor, the end user themselves, usually a store manager, and at NCR itself. These were always moving targets and were never the same, so for this reason, it's critical to read things through and always print your work orders and any supporting documentation. The other cool thing about working with a company like NCR is if you're only looking to do gig work temporarily, you may find out that they're hiring field techs after making a great impression to their local tech that actually takes care of the store you just worked at. Many companies will lowball because they don't know what to actually expect in your area, so they're expecting techs to submit counteroffers with different rates and fees. Never assume that what they're posting is all they want to pay. And you can definitely assume that if this company isn't willing to accept counteroffers at all, they're not a good company to do any work for. For whatever reason, I've noticed that companies that use words like nerd or geek in their names don't usually pay well for their jobs. This isn't new, and this has been a trend for as long as companies have been named like this. And I just want to be completely clear, because I don't want any legal problems. I'm not naming or thinking of any particular companies. Maybe there's a company with this type of name that actually treats their techs right. I don't know. If you know of one that does that, please put it in the comments. But to be completely clear, to my knowledge, up to this point, I literally have never ever heard of a company that's got geek or nerd in the name that actually treats their techs well. And so basically, these companies target residential customers and flat rate services at lower rates than local shops would charge for the same job. So you can imagine the peanuts they're sharing with their techs. Or you could just read the jobs posted in FieldNation so you don't have to imagine it. Unfortunately, you can't block a company without having done a job for them, but you can set your hourly rate at a point where you won't see these garbage jobs. You must be willing and able to watch and respond to these alerts every chance you can get. In my experience, most work orders come through between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. local time, Monday through Friday. However, you should definitely watch the boards on weekends, as sometimes work orders are posted then. While it wasn't always this easy, the mobile app makes it so easy to watch for incoming work, and you can even schedule when you see alerts, in case you need silence from it for a certain time window. The catch here is you must remember you're a business and not an employee, so you don't actually have a 9 to 5 schedule no matter how much you might want one. Just because it's 5 p.m. doesn't mean you have to not worry about work anymore. The client might require paperwork to be submitted by 9 a.m. the next morning, and you may have to work on that paperwork until later that evening just to get things submitted on time. unpaid time doing that paperwork, mind you, which is one of the reasons I try to do my paperwork before I even leave, so I am incentivized to hurry up and get it all done as fast as possible, and potentially be paid for doing it, as on hourly jobs you can get your paperwork at least organized and ready while you're on hold waiting to be released from site. Sometimes these jobs will only be available for minutes, if not moments. I've received an alert, opened it immediately, and already saw it was assigned to another tech. While these instances were probably because it was meant for that tech, they can and do come and go that fast on occasion. Stay alert, stay alive. You really need to pace yourself, and don't work yourself like a machine. You're hopefully charging way more than you'd see as an employee, and this means that if you know you're going to need a certain day off, go ahead and give it to yourself. It's not worth it to work yourself to death. Your physical and mental health depend on it. This doesn't mean you no-show to a job or cancel a job with less than 24 hours notice unless you really can't avoid it. But in the case of mental health, if you establish good habits, you'll be less inclined to skip out on work because of overload. Separation from work and personal life is important, which leads me to my next point. For as long as you can afford it, you should have a separate work phone which has its own number and set of apps for your field work. The number on your FieldNation profile, the number on your business cards, or wherever you publish numbers should always be your secondary cell. Otherwise, what will happen is companies will hound you at your personal number on days you want to be left alone. Some companies do operate 24/7 and will call you even on Sundays to confirm work for the next day. Make sure you have that phone on with all numbers for those companies saved, so as time goes on, you'll know when it's important to answer. Remember, you are a business, not an employee. Your free time is not protected by anyone but you, and you have a lot less of it now. That 10 a.m. Sunday call confirming Monday work, I lost a work order that way because I didn't have the number saved and thought they were a telemarketer, and I went off on them. I later apologized and got further work from the company, but learn from my mistake, please. The real downfall of taking these jobs on FieldNation is these companies aren't going to dedicate any amount of work to any of their techs, no matter how much they like your work. Every time a job is published, the same pool of techs bids on the job, and whoever gets it, gets it. You can't expect or even ask for this. Even if you go to the companies that lets tech go directly, they still have no obligation or loyalty to keep sending work to you. You just have to bid every chance you get and do the best work you can every time you get a chance to work. Schedule work weeks out in advance, not just immediately. When you open FieldNation to look for available work, your question to yourself shouldn't be, what am I going to be doing this week? But what will I be doing in the future? I used to struggle with getting enough work on FieldNation until I realized I was struggling because of the way I was thinking about the work. So I started taking jobs that were scheduled 2 to 3 weeks out, and I noticed that most of the jobs that got posted are scheduled this way. I was able to start booking myself out weeks in advance, giving myself days off on the busier weeks, and overall boosted my quality of life because I had plenty of work and knew overall what I was doing every week. That said, work orders do occasionally get canceled by the client, parts don't get shipped on time, and so sometimes I've had to pick up a smaller job to make up some of the loss from those happenings. This sort of thing also helps to improve regular business too. Remember, the best professionals are the ones that are the busiest and hardest to get work scheduled with. If someone is readily available most of the time, there's probably a strong reason for it, and it isn't because they're the best at what they do. This is the kind of the same thing I said earlier about not being afraid to bid on jobs, but more specifically, the counteroffer feature lets you bid for different hourly rates, adding different expenses such as trip fees, mileage, materials, as well as blended rates. Blended rates are to say that for the first few hours done at a flat rate, but a certain amount of hours above that go for an hourly rate. A lot of clients like those, but I feel like those are most often exploited by cheap companies that underbid jobs themselves, and or they just don't respect their techs. You'll learn which ones are which the longer you're on the platform. Some clients are great and you'll always be happy to take their work. Others you'll just ignore every time unless you're desperate for work. When you open FieldNation to look for available work, your question to yourself shouldn't be, what am I going to be doing this week? But what will I be doing in the future? I used to struggle with getting enough work on FieldNation until I realized I was struggling because of the way I was thinking about the work. So I started taking jobs that were scheduled 2 to 3 weeks out, and I noticed that most of the jobs that got posted are scheduled this way. I was able to start booking myself out weeks in advance, giving myself days off on the busier weeks, and overall boosted my quality of life because I had plenty of work and knew overall what I was doing every week. That said, work orders do occasionally get canceled by the client, parts don't get shipped on time, and so sometimes I've had to pick up a smaller job to make up some of the loss from those happenings. This sort of thing also helps to improve regular business too. Remember, the best professionals are the ones that are the busiest and hardest to get work scheduled with. If someone is readily available most of the time, there's probably a strong reason for it, and it isn't because they're the best at what they do.